The rain had been falling for hours. Luxury cars glided through downtown Manhattan, their headlights reflecting off the wet pavement like ribbons of gold. People hurried beneath umbrellas, eyes fixed on their phones, too busy to notice the
It's
old
been a
man
long
sitting
time.
alone on a weathered wooden bench outside a closed bookstore. His grey coat was soaked. His hands trembled from the cold, yet his posture remained strangely dignified. Resting beside him was a faded leather satchel that looked decades old. Every few minutes he glanced toward the busy intersection, as though waiting for someone who never arrived. Hundreds of people walked past. Not one of them stopped. Then a black Rolls-Royce slowed to a stop at the curb. The driver quickly stepped out and opened the rear door. Out came Ethan Carter. At 42, Ethan was one of America's youngest self-made billionaires. As founder and CEO of Carter Dynamics, he had built one of the world's fastest-growing technology companies. Business magazines called him a visionary. Investors admired his discipline. Employees respected his fairness. But the public also knew him as a man who rarely smiled. His life was measured in meetings, acquisitions, and impossible deadlines. Every minute had a purpose, or at least it used to. As Ethan walked toward the entrance of a charity gala, something caught his attention. The old man wasn't asking for money. He wasn't holding a cardboard sign. He wasn't begging. He simply sat there, quietly watching the rain. Something about him felt familiar. Ethan slowed. His assistant looked confused. "Sir, the board members are waiting." Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he removed his tailored cashmere coat, walked across the sidewalk, and gently draped it over the old man's shoulders. "You'll freeze out here," Ethan said softly. For several seconds, the old man didn't move. Then he slowly looked up. His tired blue eyes met Ethan's. A faint smile appeared. "You've grown into a good man." Ethan frowned. The stranger continued in a calm voice. "Your mother would be proud of you. Ethan James Carter." Time seemed to stop. Only one person outside Ethan's family had ever known his full name: his late mother. No newspaper had ever printed it. No interview had mentioned it. Not even most of his closest employees knew his middle name. Ethan stared at the old man. "I'm sorry." His voice almost disappeared beneath the sound of the rain. "Have we met before?" The old man smiled again. "Not yet." Then he stood, picked up his worn leather satchel, and slowly disappeared into the crowd before Ethan could stop him. Ethan remained frozen. Who was he? How did he know his mother's name? And why did it feel as though the past had suddenly reached out and touched him? Those questions would soon unravel a family secret buried for more than 30 years. A secret that would change everything Ethan believed about his father and about himself. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with mystery, unforgettable characters, and powerful twists, subscribe to our channel and turn on the bell icon. After watching today's story, tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were standing in Ethan's shoes. Now, let's go back 24 hours. The top floor of Carter Dynamics overlooked the entire Manhattan skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city that never seemed to rest. Inside the executive boardroom, dozens of directors waited in silence. A presentation flashed across a massive screen. Another acquisition, another billion-dollar deal. For everyone else, it was history in the making. For Ethan, it felt empty. His chief financial officer smiled. "This acquisition increases our market value by almost 12%. Applause filled the room. Ethan nodded politely. Good work, nothing more. His executives exchanged glances. Years earlier, Ethan would have celebrated a victory like this. Now he simply gathered his notes. Meeting adjourned. As people filed out, only one person remained: Claire Carter. Not only was she Ethan's wife, but she was also one of the country's most respected corporate attorneys. She watched him quietly. "You should be happy." "I am." She raised an eyebrow. "That's your business voice." Ethan sighed. "I'm just tired." Claire walked toward the window. "You've built everything you ever dreamed of." "Not everything." His answer came so quickly it surprised even him. Claire turned. "What are you still looking for?" Ethan looked across the city. "I don't know." He wasn't lying. For years he'd believed success would silence the questions he'd carried since childhood. It never had. Growing up, Ethan knew only one version of his family story. His father had abandoned them. That was what everyone believed. When Ethan was 8 years old, his father disappeared without explanation. No goodbye, no letters, no phone calls, only silence. His mother never spoke badly about him. She simply said, "Sometimes people carry burdens they can't explain." After she passed away from cancer 12 years later, Ethan inherited a small wooden box she had hidden in her bedroom closet. Inside were photographs, a wedding ring, 3 unopened letters addressed to his father, and one sentence written on the lid. "One day you'll know the truth." He had never opened the letters. Part of him feared what they might contain. Part of him feared they contained nothing at all. Claire gently touched his hand. "You're thinking about them again." He nodded. "I keep wondering why Mum wanted me to wait." "For what?" "I don't know." His phone buzzed. It was Marcus, his longtime driver. "Sir, your schedule for tomorrow has changed." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "What happened?" "The city requested your attendance at tomorrow night's charity gala." Ethan almost declined. Then Marcus added, "It's being held only 2 blocks from the neighbourhood where your parents first met." Ethan paused. "I'll be there." The next morning began like every other. Before sunrise, Ethan was already in the company gym. At 6 o'clock, he reviewed international market reports. At 7, he held video conferences with offices in London and Tokyo. By noon, he had approved 4 major investments. Everyone admired his discipline. No one noticed his loneliness. Late that afternoon, Ethan stood alone inside his private office. He opened the drawer of his desk. Inside sat the old wooden box. Carefully, he lifted it out. Dust covered the lid. His fingers traced the handwritten words left by his mother. "One day you'll know the truth." For the first time in over 20 years. He considered opening those letters. Just as his hand reached for the first envelope, his assistant knocked urgently. "Mr. Carter, it's time to leave for the gala." Ethan quietly closed the box again. He had no idea that within the next hour, a chance encounter with a forgotten old man sitting in the rain would begin uncovering the truth his mother had wanted him to find all along. The image of the old man stayed with Ethan all night. Not because he had helped him. Helping strangers wasn't unusual for Ethan. Through his foundation, he had donated millions to hospitals, schools, and homeless shelters. But this was different. The old man hadn't thanked him. He hadn't asked for anything. Instead, he had spoken Ethan's full name, the name only his mother used when she wanted his complete attention. As the Rolls-Royce carried Ethan home through the rain, he couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter hadn't been an accident. Someone like that didn't simply disappear. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Carter Dynamics earlier than usual. His assistant, Rebecca Lawson, noticed immediately that something was bothering him. "You've cancelled your breakfast meeting," she said cautiously. "I need information." "About what?" "An elderly man." Rebecca blinked. "That's not the answer I expected." Ethan slid a business card across the desk. "This is the location where I met him. I want every security camera from that block." "City cameras?" "Every one of them." Rebecca hesitated. "That's a lot of footage." "I know. Is he dangerous?" Ethan looked out the window. "I don't know, but somehow he knows my family. Across the city." Arthur Bennett sat quietly inside a small neighbourhood diner. The waitress placed a cup of black coffee in front of him. "You still won't let me charge you." Arthur smiled. "You already do enough." She shook her head. "You always leave before anyone can buy you breakfast." Arthur looked through the window. Traffic rushed past. People hurried to work. None of them noticed the elderly man quietly reading a faded newspaper from nearly 30 years ago. Inside the folded pages was a yellowed photograph. A young man stood beside another smiling couple. The young man was unmistakably Ethan's father. Arthur gently touched the photograph. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I couldn't tell him before." Meanwhile, Rebecca entered Ethan's office carrying a tablet. "We found him." Ethan stood immediately. "Where?" She enlarged a surveillance image. The old man had walked only 3 blocks after leaving Ethan. Then he disappeared into an old brick building. No cameras inside. Rebecca shook her head. "The building belongs to St. Gabriel Community Centre. A shelter. A legal aid centre." That surprised Ethan. A legal aid centre? They help people who can't afford attorneys. Claire happened to walk into the office at that moment. She looked at the screen. "St. Gabriel. You know it. I volunteered there during law school." She smiled faintly. "The founder was famous." "Who?" "A journalist." Ethan's attention sharpened. What was his name? Claire frowned, trying to remember. I think Arthur. Arthur Bennett. The name hit Ethan harder than expected. Arthur. The old man had never introduced himself, yet hearing the name felt strangely familiar, as though he'd heard it years ago, long before this moment, that afternoon. Ethan drove to St. Gabriel himself. The building was far older than the surrounding offices. Its paint had faded. The bricks showed decades of weather. Inside, volunteers helped struggling families complete paperwork while lawyers offered free advice. Everything felt humble, real, human. A receptionist smiled warmly. Can I help you? I'm looking for Arthur Bennett. The woman's smile faded. You just missed him. When will he be back? He comes and goes. Does he work here? She nodded. He refuses to retire. What does he do? He mostly reads old case files. Ethan frowned. Case files? He says some stories aren't finished. As Ethan turned to leave, his eyes landed on a wall covered with framed photographs. One picture immediately caught his attention. It showed a much younger Arthur standing beside dozens of reporters. Above the frame was a newspaper headline. Journalist exposes largest corporate corruption case of the decade. The date, 32 years ago. Exactly 1 year before Ethan's father disappeared. His heartbeat quickened. Something connected these events. He just couldn't see how. Back at Carter Dynamics, Claire spread several newspaper archives across Ethan's desk. I did some digging. What did you find? Arthur Bennett was one of the country's best investigative journalists. So why is he homeless? No one knows. She pointed toward another article. He disappeared from public life shortly after exposing corruption involving a powerful manufacturing company. Ethan read the company name, then froze. It sounded familiar. Very familiar. He walked toward his bookshelf, pulled down an old leather folder, opened it. Inside were the last financial records his father had ever worked on before vanishing. The company name matched exactly. Ethan slowly looked at Claire. This can't be a coincidence. Claire didn't answer, because she was thinking exactly the same thing. That evening, Arthur returned to his tiny apartment above an abandoned bookstore. The room contained almost nothing. A narrow bed, one wooden chair, several shelves filled with old notebooks, stacks of newspaper clippings, and hundreds of handwritten journals. Arthur carefully removed a small metal key from his pocket. He unlocked an old wooden chest hidden beneath the bed. Inside were dozens of sealed envelopes, each labelled with a year, each untouched. At the very bottom rested a faded photograph. A young Ethan sat on his father's shoulders in a sunny park, laughing. Arthur gently held the picture. I promised him, he whispered. I'd protect the truth until the time was right. A sudden knock echoed through the apartment. Arthur looked toward the door. No one ever visited. Slowly, he opened it. Standing outside was a woman in an expensive black suit. She smiled politely. Mr. Bennett, my employer would like a word. Arthur's expression changed instantly. I've waited 30 years for this. And now, they've finally found me. Arthur stared at the woman standing outside his apartment. She wore an elegant black suit, leather gloves, and carried herself with the confidence of someone used to delivering difficult messages. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her umbrella. Mr. Bennett, she asked again. Arthur didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her face. You work for them, he said quietly. The woman sighed. I work for someone who wants to avoid reopening old wounds. Arthur gave a faint, tired smile. Old wounds never heal when they're covered instead of cleaned. She lowered her voice. My employer is prepared to compensate you generously. Arthur almost laughed. 30 years ago, they tried money. When that failed, they tried fear. And when that failed, they destroyed lives. The woman's expression hardened. This is your last opportunity to walk away. Arthur slowly closed the apartment door. I'm done walking away. The next morning, Ethan couldn't focus. During a board meeting, executives debated a billion-dollar merger. Charts flashed across the conference room screen. Questions filled the room. But Ethan heard almost none of it. His thoughts stayed with Arthur Bennett. Why had one of the country's most respected investigative journalists disappeared? Why had he recognized Ethan immediately? And why did his father's company appear in Arthur's old investigations? Finally, Ethan interrupted the meeting. "We'll continue tomorrow." The directors looked surprised. One executive whispered, "This deal can't wait." Ethan gathered his files. "It can." Without another word, he walked out. Claire was waiting outside his office. "I knew you wouldn't stay." Ethan smiled faintly. "You know me too well." She handed him a folder. "I contacted a retired judge I worked with years ago. What did he say?" "He remembered Arthur Bennett. And he said Arthur was obsessed with exposing corruption." "Did he succeed?" Claire hesitated. "He uncovered enough evidence to send several executives to prison. But he disappeared before the final hearing." Ethan frowned. "Why?" The judge said Arthur received death threats. He believed someone inside the investigation had been bribed. Ethan felt a chill. If Arthur vanished before testifying. Claire nodded. Then someone wanted the truth buried. That afternoon, Ethan returned to St. Gabriel Community Centre. This time Arthur was there. He sat alone in the library, carefully restoring old newspaper articles into plastic sleeves. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows. For several moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Ethan pulled out a chair. "Can I sit?" Arthur smiled. I wondered how long it would take. Ethan sat down. "You know who I am." "I do." "How?" Arthur looked at him with gentle eyes. "Because I promised your father I'd watch over you." The words hit Ethan like a punch. "My father?" Arthur nodded. "Daniel Carter. My father abandoned us." Arthur's expression became sad. "No, he sacrificed everything for you." Ethan stood abruptly. "No, that's impossible. My mother waited for him for years. She died believing he'd left." Arthur lowered his head. "Your mother never believed that." Ethan froze. "What?" She knew exactly why he disappeared. The room fell silent. Every belief Ethan had carried since childhood suddenly felt uncertain. Arthur reached into his satchel. Carefully, he removed an old envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. On the front was elegant handwriting. "For Ethan. When he is ready." Ethan's breathing became shallow. "That's..." Arthur nodded. "Your father's handwriting." With trembling hands, Ethan accepted the envelope. He hesitated. For years he had imagined what he would say if he ever heard from his father. Anger, questions, accusations. Instead, he found himself afraid to open the letter. Arthur understood. Truth changes people. So does waiting too long. Slowly, Ethan unfolded the paper. The ink had faded, but every word remained clear. "My son..." If you're reading this, then Arthur finally decided it was safe. "The world will tell you I abandoned you. Believe only one thing. I loved you every single day. I left because powerful people discovered I was helping Arthur expose a company responsible for countless deaths. They threatened your mother. They threatened you. If I stayed, neither of you would survive. So I disappeared. Not because I stopped being your father, because I never stopped. One day I hope you'll understand. Forgive me. Love always, Dad." Tears filled Ethan's eyes before he realized he was crying. His father hadn't abandoned him. He had protected him. Every painful memory, every birthday spent wondering, every Christmas waiting. It had all been built on a lie. Ethan looked at Arthur. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Arthur's shoulders slumped. "Because your father made me promise. He believed the people responsible would come after you. And they did. They watched your family for years. They only stopped after your mother's passing." Ethan whispered, "So all this time..." Arthur nodded. "We were waiting." Before Ethan could ask another question, the library lights suddenly went dark. A loud crash echoed outside. One of the volunteers rushed inside, terrified. "Mr. Bennett, someone broke into your apartment." Arthur stood instantly. "My journals." He hurried outside. Ethan followed. When they reached the apartment building, police cars already surrounded the entrance. Arthur pushed past the officers. His tiny room had been destroyed. Books scattered across the floor. Shelves overturned. Drawers emptied. The wooden chest beneath the bed had been forced open. Everything inside was gone. Except one journal. It lay in the centre of the room, almost as if someone had wanted Arthur to find it. Arthur picked it up slowly. Inside the front cover, Someone had written a message in black ink. "Stop digging. Next time, there won't be a warning." Arthur closed the journal. His hands trembled. Ethan looked around the room. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone knew Arthur had started talking. Someone knew the truth was coming out. And someone was desperate to keep it buried. Ethan turned toward Arthur. "They're afraid." Arthur nodded. "Yes, for the first time in 30 years. They're afraid." The warning wasn't meant for Arthur. It was meant for Ethan. Standing in the middle of the destroyed apartment, Ethan looked around at the scattered journals, broken furniture, and shattered picture frames. Whoever had done this hadn't come looking for money. They had come looking for the truth. Police officers carefully photographed the room, but Ethan already knew they were too late. The most important evidence was gone. Arthur slowly picked up a cracked picture frame from the floor. Inside was an old photograph of Ethan's parents on their wedding day. The glass had shattered directly across Daniel Carter's face. Arthur stared at it for several seconds. "They're trying to erase him again," he whispered. Ethan clenched his jaw. Not this time. The following morning, Ethan arrived at Carter Dynamics before sunrise. The building was almost empty. For the first time in years, he didn't head to the executive floor. Instead, he entered the company's archive room. Thousands of old paper files filled metal shelves from floor to ceiling. Most companies had digitized everything years ago. But Ethan's father believed that paper records should never disappear. Now Ethan finally understood why. He spent hours searching through documents from more than 30 years earlier. Invoices, contracts, employee records, meeting minutes. Nothing seemed unusual, until he found one file with several pages missing. The cover read, "Hamilton Industrial Holdings." The same company Arthur had investigated decades earlier. Someone had removed critical documents, but they had overlooked one thing, a handwritten note tucked inside the back cover. It wasn't signed. It simply read, "If these records disappear, trust Michael Reynolds." Ethan frowned. Michael Reynolds. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then it came to him. Michael Reynolds had been his father's closest friend, and according to family history, he had died in a car accident nearly 30 years ago. Claire entered the archive room carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought I'd find you here." Ethan handed her the note. She read it twice. "That's impossible." "I know. I handled your father's estate." There was never any mention of this. Ethan leaned against the shelf. What if everything we've believed is wrong? Claire looked at him seriously. If someone lied about your father, they could have lied about Michael too. That afternoon, Rebecca knocked on Ethan's office door. "You have an unexpected visitor." "Who?" He refused to give his name. Ethan walked into the reception area. An elderly man in a maintenance uniform stood quietly near the window. His posture was calm. His hands were rough from decades of physical work. When he saw Ethan, he smiled. "I hoped Arthur would reach you before they reached him." Ethan's eyes widened. "You know Arthur?" The man nodded. "We work together. I'm Michael Reynolds." For several seconds, neither Ethan nor Claire spoke. The impossible had just walked through the front door. Inside Ethan's private office, Michael slowly removed his worn work cap. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "You thought I died." "I did." Michael smiled sadly. So did everyone else. He explained that after Daniel Carter disappeared, powerful executives realized Michael also possessed evidence exposing their illegal activities. Arthur convinced him to fake his death with the help of a trusted federal investigator. For nearly 3 decades, Michael had lived under another name, working ordinary jobs, avoiding attention, waiting. Waiting for what? Ethan asked. Michael looked him in the eye. "For you." Before Ethan could respond, Rebecca rushed into the office. "Sir!" She looked frightened. "Arthur's missing." The room went silent. "What happened?" "He left St. Gabriel this morning. He never arrived home. His phone was found in an alley 2 blocks away." Claire immediately grabbed her coat. "We're calling the police." Michael shook his head. "No." Everyone looked at him. "If the same people are behind this, they'll know every move the police make." Ethan felt anger rising inside him. "They've taken enough. I'm done waiting. Late that evening, using one of Arthur's remaining journals, Michael identified an old warehouse on the Brooklyn waterfront. It was one of Hamilton Industrial's abandoned storage buildings, he explained. If they're holding Arthur, this is where I'd start. Rain poured heavily as Ethan's SUV pulled into the deserted industrial district. The warehouses stood like giant shadows against the river. Broken windows reflected flashes of lightning. Everything felt abandoned. Too abandoned. Claire looked toward Ethan. This could be a trap. He nodded. I know. But if Arthur's inside, I can't walk away. The group entered the warehouse carefully. Their footsteps echoed across the empty concrete floor. Rows of rusted machinery stretched into darkness. Then, a faint voice. Ethan. It was barely audible. He followed the sound. Near the back of the warehouse, Arthur sat tied to a steel chair, bruised, exhausted, but alive. Ethan hurried toward him. Before he could reach him, a slow clap echoed through the building. Someone stepped out of the shadows. An older man wearing a tailored charcoal suit, perfectly polished shoes, silver hair, cold eyes. He smiled. I wondered how long it would take. Arthur closed his eyes. I hoped you'd never meet him. Ethan faced the stranger. Who are you? The man extended his hand as though introducing himself at a business conference. Victor Hamilton. The name hit Ethan immediately. Hamilton, founder of Hamilton Industrial Holdings, the company at the center of every hidden document, the corporation his father had tried to expose. Victor smiled calmly. Your father caused me more trouble than anyone else. And now, it seems his son wants to finish what he started. Ethan's fist tightened. Victor's expression never changed. You've built an extraordinary company, Mr. Carter. It would be unfortunate if history repeated itself. The warehouse fell silent. Ethan realized the battle ahead wasn't just about discovering the truth anymore. It was about surviving long enough to reveal it. And Victor Hamilton had spent 30 years making sure that never happened.